There's nothing more painful than a family turning its back on you when you need them the most. But what happens when the son you raised ends up being the one to turn the tables on those who abandoned him? My daughter, Betty, walked out on her autistic son, Andy, leaving me to pick up the pieces. Little did she know that years later, Andy would build a fortune of his own, and everything would change. Welcome, my friends, and thank you for joining me today. I'd love to know where you are watching from. Drop your city and country in the comments. Go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. If you haven't already, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Now back to my story. My name is Kenneth Milton. If you had told me, all those years ago, that my life would end up like this, I would have laughed in your face. I thought I had it all figured out, raising a family, providing for them, giving them everything they needed. But nothing prepares you for the moment your child abandons their own. And that's exactly what my daughter Betty did. When Betty left, I didn't know what hit me. I had spent my entire life building a family, and just like that, she walked out the door. She couldn't handle being a mother, not to a child like Andy. It wasn't like she didn't have her reasons. She told me that Andy's autism was too much. His tantrums, his meltdowns, the endless doctor's appointments, it was all too overwhelming for her. I can't say I understood it completely, but I knew that no matter what, Andy was my responsibility. She was his mother, but she left. And in the end, it was my responsibility to pick up the pieces. Andy was only 8 when Betty left. I still remember the confusion in his eyes when she packed her bags. He didn't understand why his mother was leaving him. He didn't understand why she couldn't take care of him. And as much as it tore me apart to see him like that, I knew I couldn't let him slip through the cracks. I had to be the father he needed, whether he knew it or not. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know everything about autism, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let my grandson fall through the cracks. I took on the role of both father and grandfather, juggling responsibilities I never imagined I'd have to face. I had to learn on the fly, from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed. I learned what helped calm him down during his worst meltdowns. I learned how to help him with his schoolwork, and I learned to simply listen when he needed someone to talk to. Over the years, our bond grew stronger. What started as me trying to fill in the gaps became something deeper. Andy began to trust me. He saw me as more than just his grandfather. He saw me as the one person who never gave up on him. And I'll tell you right now, there's nothing more powerful than the love of a child who knows you're there for them, no matter what. But that's when I began to feel the bitterness. The anger started to build in me, little by little. How could Betty just walk away from him? How could she leave him to be raised by someone else? She was his mother, for crying out loud. I thought about all the missed birthdays, the holidays, the milestones she would never witness. And that anger festered. I would never tell Andy how much it hurt, how much it burned inside me to see his mother's absence in his life. But deep down, I couldn't shake the betrayal. Betty didn't deserve a second chance. She didn't deserve to come back and play a part in his life now. She'd made her choice. I couldn't forget that. But what really got to me was the thought that maybe, just maybe, she'd come back. The idea sat in the back of my mind, buried deep down, and I ignored it as best I could. I didn't want to think that one day, Betty might come back, just when everything seemed perfect. The truth is, I didn't know what Andy would do if she ever came back into the picture. He was growing up, becoming his own person, and I was proud of him. I didn't want anyone to ruin that. Certainly not Betty. So there I was, living this quiet life with Andy, raising him the best I could. And for all the challenges he brought, there were moments of joy. I was proud of what he was becoming. But little did I know, things were about to change in a way neither of us expected. How would you feel if your own child abandoned their own? Would you be able to forgive them if they came back after years? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Andy wasn't just any ordinary child. I always knew he had something special inside him, something people failed to see because of his diagnosis. And when he told me he'd built something that could change lives, I never imagined how far his brilliance would take him. Andy's fascination with technology started young. As a kid, he wasn't like the others. While most children were playing with toy cars or dolls, Andy spent his time with his hands glued to gadgets. Computers, phones, anything with a screen, really. It started off as just a curiosity, him pressing buttons, trying to figure out how things worked. But little by little, that curiosity grew into something more, a skill, a gift. I wasn't the most tech-savvy person, but I saw the way his eyes lit up when he figured something out, the way he became so immersed in whatever he was doing. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. I had no idea what he was doing with that old computer I bought him a few years back. He'd talk about coding, apps, algorithms, words I didn't even understand. But I supported him anyway. He didn't need me to understand. He just needed me to be there. "Grandpa," he said one day, breaking his silence after hours of typing away on his computer. "I think I made something." I walked over to his desk, peering over his shoulder. His eyes were wide with excitement, a spark of determination in them. On the screen was a simple interface, a blue and white layout that seemed too simple to be anything groundbreaking. But then I saw the words he had written under the title. Focus Mind. "What's this, Andy?" I asked. "It's an app, Grandpa. It's a productivity app. Well, it's more than that. It's designed to help kids like me stay organized, to track emotions, to manage time. It's going to help kids with autism, just like me." At that moment, something clicked. Maybe I didn't understand all of it, but I knew one thing: Andy was onto something big. I didn't know where it would lead, but I believed in him. No matter how unconventional his way of learning was, I knew his heart and his mind were in the right place. The first version of Focus Mind was simple, like a rough sketch of a masterpiece. But it worked. It helped Andy, and after a few months of tweaking, he began sharing it with others. Parents, teachers, therapists, they all gave positive feedback, telling Andy how it helped their children with autism stay on task, regulate their emotions, and navigate daily challenges. It didn't take long for word to spread. The app started to gain traction. I'll never forget the first email we got from a potential investor. I had no idea what it meant, but Andy's face lit up when he showed it to me. The message was from someone in the tech industry, someone who had seen the potential in Focus Mind. At first, it was just a few small investors, tech enthusiasts who believed in Andy's vision. But as the app continued to improve and grow, so did the interest. I saw my grandson, the boy who had struggled so much growing up, turning into a young entrepreneur, someone people were starting to take seriously. Investors were offering deals, suggesting partnerships, and I could see the future unfolding in front of us. As the money started pouring in, things changed. Andy wasn't just a child anymore. He was a business owner. A creator. The world that had once overlooked him because of his autism was now paying attention, eager to see what he could do next. And while it was overwhelming at times, I couldn't help but feel proud of him. His success wasn't just about money. It was about proving to the world that he was capable of far more than anyone had ever believed. The reality hit me harder than I expected. Andy had built something real. Something that could change lives. But as his success grew, so did the challenges. There were people, even some family members, who were suddenly interested in him, not because of his potential, but because of his money. And that's when I started to wonder, who really cared about Andy, and who was just interested in what he could provide. But for now, I pushed that thought aside. For the first time in a long while, I felt hope. For both of us. Just when everything seemed perfect, my estranged daughter, Betty, came back into our lives. And she wasn't here for a reunion, she was here for something selfish. She had heard about Andy's success, and now, she wanted a piece of it. If you think Betty's return is going to shake things up, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for what's coming next. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. It was a normal Saturday afternoon when she showed up. I'd been busy, helping Andy with some updates for Focus Mind. We were discussing the latest round of features we were rolling out, tweaking designs, and planning for the future. It felt like everything was finally falling into place for him, and I couldn't have been more proud. Then the knock came at the door. I opened it, expecting a delivery or maybe a neighbor needing something. But standing there, in the doorway, was Betty. My daughter. The woman who had walked out of our lives years ago without a second thought. For a moment, I stood frozen, unsure of what to say. She hadn't changed much in appearance, still the same blonde hair, sharp features, and cold blue eyes that once made me believe she was invincible. But the look in her eyes now, it wasn't the same. There was no warmth, no apology. It was as if she had walked into the room for the first time, demanding attention. "Dad," she said, her voice distant. "We need to talk." I wasn't sure what to feel. Anger? Confusion? Shock? Maybe a little bit of everything. I had no idea why she was here, but one thing was clear, she wasn't here for a family reunion. "You know, after all these years, you just show up like nothing happened?" I could barely keep the words in. "Where were you when Andy needed you? When he was growing up? You just left us to deal with it all on our own." She sighed, clearly uninterested in my feelings. "I've been watching from a distance, Dad. Watching how well Andy's doing with his little app. You've done a good job with him, I'll give you that. But I think it's time we talk about what's fair." "What's fair?" I repeated, almost laughing at the absurdity of it. "After you walked out on him, now you want to talk about what's fair?" Betty stepped into the house, her heels clicking sharply on the wooden floor as she walked past me. "I'm his mother. I'm entitled to something." Her words hit me like a slap to the face. After all these years, after leaving Andy without a second glance, now she was demanding a piece of what he had built? Entitled? I shot back. "You're entitled to nothing. You abandoned him. You left him to fend for himself, and I'm the one who's been here, raising him, teaching him, giving him a chance." Betty wasn't listening. She glanced over at Andy, who was sitting on the couch, his attention still on his computer. He hadn't noticed her yet. For a moment I could see her gaze soften, but only for a second. It was fleeting, and I knew it didn't mean anything. This wasn't about Andy. This was about money. "I'm not here for the past, Dad," she said, turning back to me with an almost calculating expression. "I'm here because I want my fair share. You see, Andy's app has made a lot of money. A lot. And I want in." I shook my head. "Are you kidding me? You left him. You never cared, and now you want to waltz back into our lives like nothing happened?" "Listen," she said, lowering her voice. "I'm his mother. Legally, I have a right to his success. And if you think I'm just going to let you and your little grandson enjoy all of this without me getting something, you're wrong." I felt the blood rush to my face. How dare she come in here and demand something she had no right to? How could she even think that? The audacity of it made my stomach churn. "And if you don't agree," she continued, "I'll take this to court. You know, I'll get a lawyer involved. You'll see, Dad. I'm not leaving this without what's mine." That was it. The bombshell dropped. Betty wasn't here for a family reunion. She was here to take from Andy. And she wasn't going to leave without making a mess of things. As I stood there, looking at the woman who had abandoned her son and now wanted to take his hard-earned success, I realized one thing: this wasn't going to end quietly. I wasn't about to let Betty tear apart what Andy had worked so hard to build. She had left us once, but I was damn sure she wasn't going to take away what was rightfully Andy's. What would you do if someone who abandoned you suddenly wanted to claim what you've worked for? Would you give them a chance to explain, or cut them off for good? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. As the courtroom doors closed behind us, I knew this battle was only just beginning. Betty had returned, but it wasn't for forgiveness, it was for control. She wanted to take everything from Andy, and the law was on her side, or so she thought. The courtroom felt cold, sterile, like a place where justice was supposed to be served, but I wasn't feeling any justice at that moment. I was feeling nothing but dread. The moment Betty filed those papers, everything changed. We were no longer a family. We were opponents, locked in a legal battle that neither of us had asked for, but one that had been thrust upon us. I sat in the witness stand, trying to hold it together. Andy was seated beside me, though he was so quiet and withdrawn, his mind on the case, on the courtroom, and not the life he had worked so hard to build. I could see the tension in his body, the way his fingers nervously drummed on the table. He wasn't used to this, either was I. But we had no choice. Betty's lawyer was the first to speak. A well-dressed man with sharp features and an even sharper tone. He stood tall, his voice booming through the room as he laid out his case. Your Honor, we stand before you today because Kenneth Milton, the defendant, is unfit to care for his grandson. While he may have done his best to raise Andy, he is not the father figure that Andy deserves. He is a man in his late years, with little to no legal rights to Andy's success. He has no financial stability and no ability to manage the wealth Andy has generated with his business. I felt a pang in my chest, a sinking feeling, as the lawyer spoke. He wasn't wrong about one thing. Andy's success had brought in a lot of money, $2 million, and in the eyes of the law, that made him a target. But the idea that I was somehow unfit to care for Andy, it cut deeper than I thought it would. Betty's lawyer continued, using my age against me, my financial situation, and even the fact that Andy's business was booming. They twisted the narrative, painting me as someone who was just holding on by a thread, incapable of managing a fortune. Then Betty took the stand. She was calm, composed, almost too calm. She had spent the last few weeks preparing for this moment, and it showed. The woman who had once abandoned her child now stood before the court, the epitome of maternal devotion. I had no choice, she said, her voice steady. I was young, struggling. Andy's needs were beyond me. I couldn't provide for him the way he deserved. I had to leave to focus on my own life, my career. She paused, and I could see the guilt creeping into her eyes. Whether real or just a show, I couldn't tell. But I never stopped loving him. I've always wanted what was best for him. And now that he has this wealth, this success, it's my right to be a part of it. As his mother, I have every right to help him manage it. The words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. She had abandoned him. No matter what she said now, the fact remained that she had left Andy in the most vulnerable time of his life. And now she was playing the part of the devoted mother? I wanted to scream, but I knew I had to keep my composure for Andy's sake. I glanced at Andy, who was sitting in silence, his face pale. I could see the pain in his eyes. He hadn't spoken a word since we entered the courtroom. The pressure was mounting, and I could feel the weight of it all. His future was at stake, and I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let Betty take him, not after everything we had been through. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, my hands trembling. I wasn't prepared for this. I had never imagined a day when I would be fighting for Andy like this, but here I was, trying to protect him, trying to keep what he had built from falling into the hands of the very person who had walked away from him. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady. I'm not here for money or for the wealth that Andy has accumulated. I'm here because I've spent years raising him, loving him, and protecting him. I've been by his side through every challenge, and I will continue to be here for him. I'm not some old man trying to control his fortune. I'm his grandfather, and I won't let Betty come in here and take him away. Not after everything she's done. The room fell silent. I could feel Betty's eyes on me, but I didn't look at her. I kept my focus on Andy, hoping that somehow, this would be enough to prove that I wasn't going to let her take him. But the battle had only just begun. The lawyer made his next move, and I knew we were far from winning. What's your biggest fear when it comes to family disputes like this? Let me know your thoughts below. I didn't know it yet, but Andy had been one step ahead of us all along. While Betty thought she was getting the upper hand, Andy had secretly taken steps to protect himself and his future. And that's when the first twist hit, one that no one saw coming. Give this video a thumbs up if you're as shocked as I was when Andy revealed his secret move. I never expected the courtroom drama to take such a turn. For weeks, Betty had been pushing forward with her claims, acting like she had all the power. She had her lawyer in her corner, and with every motion, every accusation, it seemed like she was gaining ground. My nerves were on edge. I could feel the pressure mounting, and I knew Andy felt it too. We were fighting not just for money, but for his freedom, for his future. The night before the most critical hearing, I sat in my office, staring at the legal papers scattered across my desk. I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting back to Betty's words, to the way she had manipulated the court, painting herself as the hero in a story she never had a right to claim. I was angry. But there was nothing I could do. It felt like the odds were stacked against us, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep fighting. Then Andy came into my office, his eyes wide with excitement. I could see the tension in his face. He had been quiet for days, lost in thought. But now, there was something different about him. "Grandpa," he said, his voice filled with confidence. "I've done it." I raised an eyebrow, unsure of what he meant. "Done what, Andy?" He stepped forward, pulling out a folder from his backpack. My heart skipped a beat as he handed it to me. The folder was full of legal documents, trust agreements, signatures, and business restructuring papers. My mind raced as I flipped through the pages, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. It took me a moment to fully process it, but when I did, my heart nearly stopped. "Andy," I whispered, my voice thick with disbelief, "you've transferred everything. You've moved Focus Mind into a trust?" He nodded. "I had to, Grandpa. I saw what was happening. I knew Betty would come for what's mine. I wasn't going to let her destroy everything I've worked for." Andy had quietly restructured the business, transferring the ownership of Focus Mind into a trust that he controlled. He had outsmarted everyone, Betty, her lawyer, even me. While I had been busy trying to protect him in the courtroom, Andy had already made sure that no one could touch the business. The trust was legally ironclad, and no matter what Betty or her lawyer tried, they couldn't touch it without Andy's approval. I was stunned. I had no idea he was capable of this level of foresight. Andy wasn't just the kid I had raised, he was a force to be reckoned with. He had taken control of his future, and now, Betty had no claim to Focus Mind or any of its profits. The next morning, as we walked into the courtroom, I felt a surge of confidence. Betty had no idea what was about to hit her. As we sat down, I could see the smug look on her face. She thought she was winning. She thought she had us right where she wanted us. Then, Andy's lawyer stood up and made a motion that left everyone in the room speechless. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady, "before we proceed, we need to address an important matter. We've recently restructured Focus Mind into a trust that Andy Milton controls. All ownership of the company now resides with Andy, and as such, Betty Milton has no legal claim to it whatsoever." The room went silent. I could see the shock in Betty's eyes as her lawyer shot up from his seat, frantically flipping through the papers. This isn't possible," he stammered. "You can't just transfer ownership like that." But Andy had done exactly that. The papers were all in order, and Betty's lawyer had no leg to stand on. The look on Betty's face was priceless, utter disbelief. She had been blindsided, and for the first time, the power shifted. Betty tried to recover, but I could see the frustration building inside her. She had no control now, no leverage. The courtroom had gone from being her domain to Andy's, and she didn't know how to react. For once, she was the one who was powerless. As the judge adjourned the session, Betty stormed out of the courtroom, her face red with anger. It was clear that she was trying to figure out her next move, but for now, she had lost. I couldn't help but smile. Andy had done it. He had outsmarted her, and for the first time in this entire process, I felt like we had a chance. Have you ever had to outsmart someone to protect what's yours? What strategy did you use to win? Let me know your thoughts below. Betty wasn't giving up that easily. She fought tooth and nail, trying every trick in the book. But the real battle wasn't just about money, it was about control, family, and redemption. Andy's declaration in the courtroom stunned everyone, including Betty. Do you think Andy made the right move by standing up for himself? Or was there a better way to handle the situation? Let me know in the comments section. The courtroom was filled with tension as we walked in for what would be the final hearing. For weeks, Betty had been pushing, clawing, trying to take everything she could from Andy. But today, things were different. Today, Andy wasn't just going to sit by and let her take what was his. He was ready to speak up. I could feel the heat of the spotlight on us as we sat in the back of the room, waiting for the judge to call us forward. Andy's fingers were tapping nervously on the table, but there was a look in his eyes I hadn't seen before. It was determination. It was the same look I saw when he first created Focus Mind, like he was on the verge of something important. Betty, on the other hand, was sitting on the other side, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She had a smug look on her face, as if she was still in control of everything. But deep down, I knew she was getting desperate. Every move she made, every argument she presented, was just another attempt to regain power. She had already lost the legal battle, but she wasn't ready to admit it. "Mr. Milton," the judge called, breaking my thoughts. "It's your turn to speak." I stood up first, feeling a surge of emotion run through me. This was it, the moment I had been dreading and anticipating all at once. This was our chance to end this fight once and for all. But before I could even open my mouth, Andy stood up beside me. I could tell he was ready. His voice was steady, his posture straight. He had come a long way from the boy who used to look up to his mother for love and approval. This was his moment to take control of his own life. "Your Honor," Andy began, his voice clear and strong, "I don't want anything to do with her." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. For a second, it was as if the entire courtroom froze. Betty's face turned pale as she looked at her son. I could see the shock in her eyes, the disbelief. She wasn't prepared for this. "I don't want her to have any part of my life or my business," Andy continued, his voice unwavering. "I know the kind of person she is. I know she abandoned me when I needed her the most. I don't care about the money. I don't care about what she's trying to take from me. What I care about is that I finally have the chance to build something for myself, and I'm not going to let her destroy it." The room was silent, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. This was the moment. Andy had chosen to stand up for himself. To declare that he was done with Betty and her selfish motives. He wasn't going to let her use him anymore. He turned to face the judge, his eyes filled with conviction. "I don't need her approval, Your Honor. I don't need anyone who thinks they can take advantage of me. I've made it this far on my own, and I'll continue to do so." Betty, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally spoke up, but her words were shaky, desperate. "Andy, I'm your mother. You can't just throw me away like this. I've been there for you, in my own way. I made mistakes, but I'm here now. Don't you want a relationship with me?" But Andy wasn't swayed. "You were never there when I needed you, Mom. You left me. You chose to walk away, and now you think you can just walk back in and take what's mine. It doesn't work like that." The tension in the room was thick. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on all of us. The judge, who had been silent throughout Andy's declaration, finally spoke. "Mr. Milton," the judge said, turning to Betty, "you abandoned your son when he needed you most. And now you come into this court, asking for control over his life and his business. The law may say you have certain rights as a mother, but your actions speak otherwise. I find in favor of Andy Milton. He will retain full control of Focus Mind, and you will not be entitled to any of it." The gavel came down with a resounding thud. It was over. Betty sat there in stunned silence, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't believe what had just happened. The realization hit her all at once: she had lost. Andy had won. She was no longer in control. The courtroom was no longer her arena. It was Andy's. I felt a sense of pride wash over me as I looked at Andy. He had stood up for himself, for his future, for everything he had worked for. And in that moment, I realized that he was no longer the boy I had raised. He was a man, someone who had taken control of his own destiny, despite the odds stacked against him. As we walked out of the courtroom, I could see Andy's shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. He was free. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hope again. Not just for Andy's future, but for mine too. What would you do if you had to decide between family loyalty and standing up for what's right? Leave your thoughts in the comments. When the gavel came down, everything changed. Betty lost, Andy had won, and it was sweet. But the satisfaction wasn't just in the victory. It was in the redemption, the way Andy had built his own future, despite the odds stacked against him. Before we wrap up, I want to hear from you. What did you think of Andy's victory? Was it the ultimate form of revenge? Drop your comments below. As the judge's gavel came down with a final thud, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't just the victory. It was everything that had led up to this moment. The years of raising Andy, the sleepless nights, the fights, the struggles, and the triumphs. All of it had led to this point, and it was more than I ever imagined. Betty was defeated. Her plans, her manipulations crumbled right before her eyes. I looked over at Andy, who was standing next to me, his face a mixture of relief and pride. For the first time in his life, I saw a young man who had just taken full control of his own destiny. He wasn't the same boy who used to sit in silence, unsure of his place in the world. He was a force now, someone who had faced down not just his mother, but the world that had underestimated him. And he had come out on top. Betty was the first to leave the courtroom. She stood up slowly, her face pale with anger and disbelief. She walked past us without saying a word, her eyes glaring at Andy. She didn't say goodbye, didn't offer any words of regret. She had lost. And all the years she had spent building up her image as a mother who cared, as a woman who deserved something from her son, it all crumbled in an instant. Andy didn't look at her as she left. Instead, he turned to me, his expression softening. "Grandpa, I did it," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You sure did, kid," I replied, my throat tight with pride. "You did it on your terms." Andy's gaze wandered to the floor, and for a moment, he was lost in thought. The silence between us wasn't awkward, but reflective. He had won, but this victory wasn't about money or success. It wasn't about punishing Betty either. It was about something far deeper. "I can't believe she tried to take everything," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But honestly, I don't even care about the money anymore. I've built something on my own. I've done something that matters, and I don't need anyone else to tell me what I'm worth. I don't need her approval." I could hear the conviction in his voice, and it made my heart swell with pride. Andy had learned a hard lesson in life. The only person who defines your worth is yourself. And I had watched him go from a scared, confused boy to someone who had built an empire, all while staying true to who he was. Betty's return had shaken us both, but it had also solidified something in Andy. He no longer needed her. He didn't need anyone who hadn't been there for him. In the end, it wasn't about revenge, it was about freedom. The freedom to be himself, to build his future without the weight of his past holding him back. As we walked out of the courtroom together, I looked at Andy and felt an overwhelming sense of pride. The battle had been hard, and it wasn't just about the money or the business. It was about proving to himself that he didn't need to be defined by anyone else's expectations. Andy had done what no one thought possible. He had risen above the past and claimed his future. We stepped out into the bright sunlight, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. Betty was gone, and her grip on our lives had finally loosened. Andy was free, and that was all that mattered. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing than you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.